Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling a figure who is just monumental. I mean, his image is so powerful, so ingrained in pop culture, the speed, the intensity, that sort of raw physical genius, that it's almost completely overshadowed the man behind it.
It really has. We're talking, of course, about Bruce Lee.
We are. And if you're joining us for this, you really have to sort of check the popular narrative at the door.
You do. We are setting aside the myths. The idea of him as this, superhuman force, the rebellious kid who just punched his way into history, that whole story.
Right, the simple labels. People say fastest, strongest, greatest revolutionary.
And those words, ironically, they actually get in the way. They stop us from seeing what his revolution was really about.
Okay, so if we strip all that away, if we get past the yellow jumpsuit and the nunchucks, what's the actual premise for this deep talk? What's the core idea we need to hold on to?
It's this, and it's simple, but it changes everything. Bruce Lee did not begin his journey as a rebel. He began as a student, a deeply disciplined, incredibly focused, and, frankly, an obedient student.
So the man who famously broke the system.
He could only do that because he mastered it first. His disruption wasn't ego, it wasn't disrespect. It was, at its heart, an act of profound fidelity to the very principles he was taught.
That reframes the entire story. So our mission today isn't to figure out how he got so fast or strong. I mean, lots of people train hard.
Right.
The real question is why? Why did this man, who had achieved a high level of mastery in a very traditional system, feel this burning need to evolve it, to push it past its limits, even when it meant facing huge cultural blowback?
And to understand that, we have to anchor ourselves in one idea. His revolution began in obedience. It began with the traditional system of Wing Chun, under the legendary and very traditional Grandmaster Ip Man.
So our guiding thought for this whole discussion should be what, exactly?
That Bruce Lee didn't abandon tradition. He carried it so far with such intellectual honesty that the tradition itself was forced by reality to change.
Okay, so to really get that, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to place the young Bruce Lee in his time and place. He was born in San Francisco in 1940, but he grew up in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong in the 40s and 50s, that's not just any city.
No, it's a crucible. It's this fascinating, high-pressure collision of cultures. You have this ancient, often very rigid and, frankly, isolationist Chinese tradition crashing right into the full force of Western modernity.
So he's growing up breathing both of those worlds.
Exactly, which, almost certainly predisposed him to thinking synthetically later on. But as a teenager, he wasn't really this budding philosopher. He was an energetic, very competitive kid who was getting into a lot of street fights.
And the sources are pretty clear on this next point, and it's almost funny in retrospect. He didn't start training martial arts to become a global icon.
Not even close. His parents were worried. They were deeply concerned about his fighting, his restlessness, and they enrolled him in martial arts for one reason and one reason only. Discipline. It was a behavioral intervention. The goal was to take all that raw, chaotic, competitive energy and channel it into something structured. The goal wasn't to create a movie star. It was to keep their son out of trouble.
And that very practical need for discipline led him straight to Wing Chun. Why that style in particular? What made it a good fit?
Well, Wing Chun is, in many ways, the opposite of the flashy acrobatic styles you might see in, say, Chinese opera. It's often called a small frame system. It's incredibly efficient, very direct, and it's not built on having, huge muscles or being able to do backflips.
It's a system of principles.
It's a system of principles. It's geometry and physics applied to combat. And for a mind like Bruce Lee's, which was sharp, analytical, and just fundamentally restless, this was like a key turning in a lock. It gave him a framework. He wasn't just learning moves, he was learning why the moves worked.
Okay, so let's get into the weeds on that. Let's really break down the specific Wing Chun principles he learned under Ip Man, because these are the building blocks. This is the raw material for everything that comes later.
We have to. This is the intellectual foundation. Without this, Jeet Kune Do is just a random collection of techniques. With this, it's a philosophy.
So let's start with the absolute core concept of Wing Chun. The center line.
Center line, right. So imagine a straight line running from the top of your head, down through your nose and sternum, all the way to your groin. That line covers almost all of your most vital targets.
It's the most direct path to incapacitate someone.
It's the shortest, most vulnerable path. So Wing Chun philosophy is relentlessly focused on two things at once. Always protect your own center line, and simultaneously, always attack your opponents. It's a brutal lesson in geometry. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line.
Any deviation from that line is wasted time and energy.
Wasted motion.
Yeah.
Which leads directly to the second principle, economy of motion.
Which sounds simple, but I imagine in practice it's incredibly difficult.
It is. If the center line is the what, the target, then economy of motion is the how. Every single movement, every block, every punch, even every shift in your stance has to have a clear and direct purpose. There's no posing. There are no big, dramatic, circular blocks that you see in movies.
It's about getting the maximum result from the minimum amount of effort.
Precisely. You see it in the famous Wing Chun vertical punch.
Yeah.
It's not thrown from the shoulder in a big arc. It's projected straight out from the chest. It's designed for speed and directness at close range. It's pure physics.
And that relentless pursuit of efficiency then leads to what feels like a really radical idea, which is simultaneous attack and defense.
This is a huge mental shift for most martial artists. Most systems, especially back then, teach a very clear 1-2 process. Step 1, you block the incoming attack. Step 2, you launch your own counterattack. It's reactive.
It's 2 beats.
It's 2 beats. Wing Chun demands you do it in 1. Every defensive motion has to contain an offensive component. For example, a block isn't just a block. It's a deflection that simultaneously positions your other hand for a strike. It trains the mind to stop thinking in sequences and start thinking in integrated actions.
Why take 2 steps when you can take 1?
That's the core question. It's about seizing the initiative, even when you're defending.
Okay, and the fourth principle is maybe the most abstract, but also the most critical for his development. It's the concept of sensitivity through contact, the training method called Chi Sao.
Chi Sao, yeah. It translates to sticking hands, and it's less a fighting technique and more an internal training tool. It's a drill where you and your partner maintain contact with your forearms, and you learn to read each other's energy and intention through touch, not sight.
So you're not trying to guess what they're going to do visually.
No, you're feeling it. You're developing a tactile sensitivity to pressure, to shifts in their balance, to the exact moment they commit their force to an attack. It moves combat from being a purely intellectual visual problem to an intuitive physical dialogue.
It's about subconscious reaction.
It's training your body to react before your conscious mind even has time to process the threat. It's a profound concept.
So these 4 pillars, centerline, economy, simultaneous action, and sensitivity, they became his operating system, his analytical vocabulary for combat.
Absolutely. And this is why the rebel narrative is so misleading. Bruce Lee didn't reject Wing Chun because it failed him or because he thought it was, technically flawed.
He rejected the box that people were trying to put it in.
He rejected the rigidity that had crystallized around the system, the dogma that said this is the only way. Look, the discipline wasn't the enemy. That discipline was the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for his later freedom.
It's like a musician learning scales. You don't learn scales because you want to play scales for the rest of your life.
Exactly. You learn the scales so you understand the structure of music so deeply that you can then improvise. You can play jazz, you can break the rules meaningfully because you mastered them first. Wing Chun gave Bruce Lee the scales of combat. Without it, Jeet Kune Do would have just been noise.
Okay, so he has this incredibly rigorous foundation, but now we have to transition from that period of, as you said, obedience to the period of friction. Because he's training in this very specific, very traditional environment in Hong Kong. What was that world actually like for a student like him?
It was profoundly hierarchical, almost feudal in its structure. Knowledge wasn't seen as data to be shared and tested in the open market of ideas. It was treated like a family secret, an inheritance to be guarded jealously within a specific school or lineage.
And progression wasn't just about skill.
Oh, not at all. It was painstakingly slow. It depended on your master's approval, on your perceived loyalty, on your patience, on your willingness to just conform and not ask too many questions.
And for a personality like Bruce Lee's, that's like oil and water. I mean, he was quick, he was curious to a fault, and he was fundamentally an empiricist. He needed to see proof.
Precisely. The idea that a technique worked just because a long-dead master said it did, that was completely unacceptable to him. His mind was always asking, but does it work? Does it work now? Does it work against someone who doesn't play by these rules?
So he started testing it.
He started testing it.
Yeah.
In sparring, in challenge matches, on the street. He refused to preserve a technique in a glass case just because tradition demanded it. He had to stress test it against reality. And that right there created massive tension inside a system built on preservation.
This lets us draw a really important line, the difference between a question that's disrespectful and one that's evolutionary.
This is the heart of it. A disrespectful question is about ego. It's a young student challenging the master's authority just to prove a point. An evolutionary question is different. It challenges the system's utility because the real world has changed.
Bruce Lee wasn't saying, I'm better than it, man.
No. He was saying, this system is brilliant, but it was perfected for close-quarter combat in the alleys of 19th century Foshan. What happens when it meets the realities of the 20th century? He was asking evolutionary questions.
And he recognized that Wing Chun, for all its genius, had a specific operational range. It's a close-range system.
It's designed for trapping and infighting. And he started to pose these questions that the system, in its cultural isolation, just wasn't equipped to answer. Questions that demanded data from outside the tradition.
Let's lay those questions out because they really are the catalyst for everything. The first one was about distance.
Right. What happens outside of trapping range? It's a simple, devastating question. If your opponent is a Western boxer with a great jab or a Taekwondo fighter with long-range kicks, they can control the distance. And if you can't get into your effective range, your entire Wing Chun arsenal is neutralized before the fight even starts.
The system didn't have a codified answer for that.
It didn't. The second question was about opponents, about size and style.
What happens against a larger, stronger opponent? Or even more critically, a grappler?
Yes. While Wing Chun is designed to overcome size with structure and technique, a massive difference in weight and reach presents real-world physics problems. And what happens when a wrestler just shoots in and takes you to the ground?
The entire vertical structure of Wing Chun collapses.
It becomes irrelevant. If man's system had virtually no ground fighting component because that wasn't the context of a 1940s Hong Kong street fight. Lee realized that ignoring the ground was, in a modern context, functional suicide.
And the final, most radical question of all.
What happens when different styles clash? In a world that was becoming more connected, you could no longer assume you'd only be fighting other Wing Chun practitioners. What happens when your system meets a boxer, a judoka, a fencer? Can it adapt on the fly?
And his conclusion was, no, not easily.
His conclusion was that any system designed primarily to preserve itself cannot easily evolve from within. It's too busy protecting its own past to adapt to the present.
And this is the perfect transition point. He leaves the rigid hierarchical world of Hong Kong and moves to the United States.
And suddenly, the floodgates of information just burst open. He's no longer in a martial arts monoculture. He's in this melting pot of ideas, and he starts teaching and sparring openly.
He carried Wing Chun with him, though. Not as a set of rules, but as a measuring stick.
It is his quality control filter. And he started testing it against all this new data. He didn't throw it away. He used it to analyze these new inputs he was encountering.
So what were those critical new inputs? The sources point to a few key areas he just dove into.
He was a sponge. First, he deeply studied Western boxing. He absorbed the footwork, the lateral movement, the bobbing and weaving, the power generation from the hips, all things that Wing Chun, which is very linear, didn't emphasize.
He also studied fencing, which seems odd at first.
It does, but it's pure genius. He wasn't interested in the sword. He was obsessed with the fencing footwork, the explosive advance lunge, the timing, the management of distance. He realized it was the master key to closing the distance safely and intercepting an opponent's attack.
That's a huge piece of the puzzle, filling that long-range gap.
A massive piece. Then, as we mentioned, he began seriously engaging with wrestling and grappling. He had to find answers for what to do on the ground, and maybe most importantly, he immersed himself in modern strength training and sports science.
This was a radical break from tradition.
Huge. Traditional martial arts often taught that strength came only from technique practice, from Chi. Lee started treating his body like a high-performance engine. He studied nutrition, anatomy, cardiovascular conditioning. He applied scientific principles to his physical development.
So when you put all of that together, he's not replacing Wing Chun. He's pressure testing it, piece by piece, against this flood of new functional information.
And that leads to the critical insight, the semantic shift that gives birth to his entire philosophy. He didn't look at his root art and say, Wing Chun is wrong. He said Wing Chun is incomplete. And that is a world of difference. To say it's wrong is to reject the foundation. To say it's incomplete is to honor the foundation, but demand that it grow, that it adapt, that it remain honest in the face of a changing reality.
That distinction right there is his act of fidelity. He respected the art so much he refused to let it become a museum piece.
Exactly. And that demand for reality over ritual, that's the process that eventually got a name, Jeet Kune Do.
Okay, so let's try to define this thing, Jeet Kune Do. And it's essential we get this right because I think it's one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of martial arts.
It absolutely is. There's been a half century of marketing confusion and just general misunderstanding. The first thing you have to know is that Jeet Kune Do, or JKD, is not a style. It was never intended to be a fixed system of fighting.
Right. The common misconception is that it's just Bruce Lee's personal mixtape. A little Wing Chun, a little boxing, a little fencing footwork, and you call it JKD.
And that completely fundamentally misses the entire point. JKD isn't a collection of techniques. It's a methodological stance. It's a process. It is, at its core, a question you're supposed to be asking yourself constantly.
He defined it philosophically.
He did. His famous phrase, using no way as way, having no limitation as limitation, that's the heart of it. It's a directive. It's permission to seek out functional truth wherever you can find it and to apply it directly to the problem of combat without being bound by dogma.
But I have to push on that a little because there's a paradox there, isn't there? If you say, my style is to have no style, doesn't no style just become your new style, a new, equally rigid box?
That's an excellent point, and it's a trap he saw his own students falling into. He wrestled with it himself. And the answer is yes. If you define JKD by the specific set of techniques Bruce Lee happened to favor in, say, 1968, then it immediately becomes a fixed system. It becomes another limitation.
So you can't just copy his moves and call it JKD.
You can't. The moment you codify it and say, this is JKD and that is not, you violated the core principle. The way of JKD is the process of finding your way, using his methodology as a guide for your own self-discovery.
So the techniques have to emerge from the reality of the situation, not from a pre-written curriculum. If you're a short person and you need grappling, you go find functional grappling. If you're tall and have long legs, you find the best kicking system.
Exactly. The focus shifts entirely from memorizing techniques which are static to understanding principles which are adaptable. The principle of economy of motion can be applied to a Wing Chun punch, a boxing jab, or a wrestling takedown. The principle is timeless. The specific application is contextual.
Okay, this brings us to what you call the paradox of his disruption. This is where it gets really interesting. He creates this philosophy to dismantle rigid systems, but the analytical tools he used to do it were forged inside one of the most rigid systems imaginable.
He earned the right to break the system because he understood its deepest architecture. This is so critical. His critique wasn't born from the ignorance or frustration of a beginner. It was born from the deep insight of a master.
If he hadn't had that Wing Chun foundation, what would JKD have looked like?
It would have been chaos, a disorganized soup of techniques without any underlying structure or logic. But because of his training with Ip Man, he had this incredible structural awareness. He knew how to analyze a system, find its strengths, and more importantly, identify its weaknesses.
So what specific intellectual tools from Wing Chun did he use to critique and synthesize other systems?
Okay, first and foremost, Wing Chun gave him that foundational structural awareness. He understood the human body as a series of gates and lines. He knew how power traveled efficiently. So when he looked at, say, a traditional karate stance, he wasn't just seeing a stance. He was analyzing it for centerline vulnerability and structural integrity.
He had a framework for analysis.
He did. Second, from Chisao, he had that incredible sensitivity to pressure, that tactile, intuitive understanding of force. It allowed him, in live sparring, to feel if a borrowed technique actually worked under pressure or if it just looked good in practice. It was his bullshit detector.
And finally, that deep, ingrained respect for efficiency.
Yes. That core belief that in a real confrontation, the simplest, most direct path is always the right one. Wing Chun gave him the intellectual vocabulary to look at a complex art like judo and distill its most efficient principles: leverage, off-balancing, while discarding the parts that were more ceremonial or less applicable to his goals.
So he wasn't just a rebel shouting, "Tradition is stupid." He was a scientist saying, "I understand this tradition so completely that I can see precisely where its core, truthful principles are being suffocated by its own institutional baggage."
That's it, exactly. He earned the intellectual authority to perform that surgery because he'd mastered the anatomy first. Without the discipline, the freedom he sought would have been meaningless.
So let's talk about that relationship with tradition, especially with his teacher, Ip Man, because the movies and the myths often portray it as this dramatic, almost adversarial break. The arrogant student surpassing the old master.
Yeah, that narrative is mostly just dramatic license. It makes for a good story, but the historical record is much more nuanced. The evidence we have shows that Bruce Lee always spoke respectfully of Ip Man. He consistently and openly credited Wing Chun as the foundation of his entire approach.
So his fight wasn't with his master.
No, his fight was with institutional stagnation. It wasn't about a person, it was about an idea. He never claimed to be a better fighter than the old masters. He claimed that a modern, adaptable methodology was superior to a rigid, unquestioning adherence to any single tradition.
And what did he see happening to the martial arts institutions around him in the 50s and 60s?
He saw them becoming performance arts. They were becoming more and more ritualized, more detached from functional, messy reality. The goal was shifting from developing functional skill to preserving a particular style's purity. Loyalty was to the institution, not to the truth.
When the main goal is preservation, innovation dies.
It has to, because innovation, by definition, requires you to change things, and that was seen as a betrayal.
So he wasn't seeking chaos. He was trying to build a bridge between unwavering loyalty and direct personal inquiry.
A philosophical bridge, and that's why, if you look closely at JKD, the Wing Chun DNA is everywhere. You see the centerline awareness, you see the obsession with interception, which is attacking the attack, you see the close-range trapping concepts. He kept the principles. He just gave himself permission to use whatever tool from whatever source best expressed that principle in the moment.
That permission is the key, the intellectual freedom. To use a technique as it was needed in 1960s Oakland, not as it was taught in 19th century Foshan.
Right, but that freedom, choosing that path of radical evolution over institutional comfort, it comes with a huge price tag.
When you step outside the castle walls, you lose Gethel's protection.
You lose its protection, its validation, its community. And he faced that head on.
What were the practical consequences of that choice for him in the U.S.?
Well, isolation was a big one. He faced intense criticism from the traditional Chinese martial arts community. They saw him as arrogant, as a traitor who was selling their cultural secrets to outsiders, especially since he insisted on teaching non-Chinese students.
This all comes to a head in the famous or infamous fight with Jack Man in 1964.
It does. And while the exact details of that fight are disputed to this day, its significance isn't. It was a formal challenge from the traditionalist community, a direct consequence of his defiance. And by most credible accounts, the fight was harder and lasted longer than Lee had expected.
It was a stress test, a real-world data point.
It was the ultimate empirical data. The experience, however it went down, was a brutal reality check. It confirmed for him in the most visceral way that his art was still incomplete. He realized he needed drastically better conditioning, better footwork, a better way to deal with an evasive opponent. The emotional cost was high, but the intellectual realization was liberating. It proved his entire thesis.
And on top of that, he had to carry the burden of representing something totally new, without a map. He was basically inventing a new paradigm for martial arts all by himself.
And this is the great lesson he provides. This is the prerequisite for true freedom. If you want to innovate, you first have to prove that you possess the self-discipline to handle the isolation and the responsibility that comes with it.
He never advocated for just messing around.
Never. His life was a testament to rigor. He trained like a maniac. He studied philosophy, physics, anatomy. He kept meticulous notes on everything. He wasn't tearing down the old building without a detailed blueprint for the new one. He was building his new architecture on an incredible foundation of intellectual and physical honesty.
Discipline has to come before freedom. Otherwise, freedom is just recklessness.
It's just a fad. It has no staying power.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Let's bring this all into the present. How is all of this relevant now? Because his influence hasn't gone away, it feels like it's just changed form.
It's transitioned from the cinematic to the methodological. His importance today is all about his prescience. He was anticipating the reality of the modern world of combat and, frankly, of expertise in general, 50 years before it became the norm.
And the ultimate proof of his philosophy, as the sources argue, is the rise of mixed martial arts, or MMA.
It is the absolute, undeniable validation of his core principles. MMA didn't invalidate Bruce Lee, it confirmed him. When the UFC first started, these style versus style matchups proved his theory in the most brutal way possible. Single, isolated systems are functionally incomplete.
The boxer couldn't handle the grappler, the karateka couldn't handle the wrestler.
Exactly. The winners, almost from day one, were the cross-trainers, the people who were already thinking like Bruce Lee. He saw the necessity of cross-training when the traditionalists were still building walls around their styles. He knew that in a connected world, style versus style clashes were inevitable.
So when you look at a modern MMA champion,
you are looking at the living embodiment of the Jeet Kune Do philosophy. Look at a fighter like Georges St. Pierre. Was he a kickboxer, a wrestler, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist? He was all of them and none of them. He was a master synthesist. He took the best footwork from boxing, the best takedowns from wrestling, the best submissions from BJJ, and integrated them into a seamless whole that worked for him.
That is pure JKD in practice. There is no single best style. There are only adaptable principles applied by a prepared individual.
That's it. And this is what elevates his contribution beyond just fighting. His real legacy is the set of questions he forces us to ask ourselves in any field, in any discipline.
Right, his legacy is a challenge to all of us who exist inside any kind of structure, whether it's a company, a creative field, or a personal practice.
And we should make those questions really explicit because they are the tools for self-assessment he left behind for you, the listener.
Okay, what's the first question?
First, why am I doing it this way? Am I following this process, this business strategy, this training method because it is genuinely the most effective and efficient solution to the current problem? Or am I just doing it because, well, that's how it's always been done?
That's a tough one. The second question.
Second, what are my assumptions? Am I operating on the assumption that my framework, my professional knowledge, my worldview is complete? Or am I actively seeking out challenging, external, non-traditional data that might expose my blind spots?
Am I living in an echo chamber?
Essentially, yes. And the third and maybe most dangerous question. What is this tradition really serving? Is this established method protecting the core truth of the work efficiency, creativity, integrity? Or is it actually just protecting the institution itself, the hierarchy, the ego of the person who created it?
Those questions are profoundly uncomfortable because they demand constant work and intellectual honesty. It's so much easier and safer to just follow the rules and stay inside the walls.
It is. But that brings us to the final, beautiful irony of Bruce Lee's legacy. He dedicated his entire life to smashing fixed systems, to warning against rigidity, to advocating for constant, fluid adaptation.
And yet what happened after he died? Jeet Kune Do became a system.
It did. It's almost inevitable. A powerful magnetic influence like his naturally creates a structure around it. Schools were formed, curriculums were written, official JKD techniques were taught, lineages and hierarchies emerged.
The very philosophy designed to eliminate boundaries ended up with new boundaries drawn all around it.
He saw it coming. He warned against it constantly. He told his students not to turn his teachings into a new dogma. But the real takeaway for us today is that when we encounter any revolutionary idea, we have to remember why the original system was broken in the first place.
It wasn't to give us a new set of rules to follow.
No. It was to encourage us to engage in our own process of continuous testing, inquiry, and personal adaptation. The tragedy would be if we just swapped our loyalty from Wing Chun to JKD, from Ip Man to Bruce Lee, without ever internalizing the core message, which is the responsibility of self-liberation.
His goal wasn't to give people a new label to wear, it was to get them to take all the labels off.
Exactly.
So, as we wrap up, our deep dive has really traced this journey from the disciplined obedience of a student in Hong Kong to the philosophical freedom of a global innovator. And it's clear that Bruce Lee wasn't a rejection of his roots.
Not at all. He was the most rigorous continuation of the intellectual questions that his training under Ip Man first allowed him to ask.
Wing Chun taught him how to think. It gave him the tools, efficiency, structure, the importance of principles over flashy techniques.
And Jeet Kune Do taught the world not to stop thinking. That's his real legacy. It's not in the movies, it's in that revolutionary methodology.
A methodology that shows us that mastery isn't just about obedience, and real freedom isn't about just abandoning everything.
He shows us that sometimes the way doesn't end when a system breaks. Sometimes that's precisely when the real path, the individual path of self-discovery, truly begins.
It's such a powerful lesson. The debt to your teacher eventually has to become a responsibility to your own truth.
And that's the challenge he leaves for everyone listening. Ask yourself, where in your own life, your own career, are you mistaking institutional loyalty for necessary discipline? At what point does the structure that once helped you grow start to become the very thing that's holding you back?
That's the friction point.
That's the pressure point. And that's where your personal Jeet Kune Do has to begin. Because to bring it all back home, we have to remember the guiding sentence of his life's work.
Bruce Lee did not destroy tradition.
He carried it far enough that it had to change,